Yo, it's your boy Logos, and today I want to finish off the series about FD Signifier video on the truth about Black Republicans. I disagree with most of the stuff he said, of course, especially the Marxist, leftist type stuff and overthrowing capitalism. And I really don't care that MLK was or not a socialist. It doesn't influence me in either way or any form. But let's finish this off.
The erasure of MLK's radical politics and the socialist leanings of his later years is a microcosm of how Black political thought has been butchered and mutilated for the better part of the last 60 years. So many of the people up in your favorite barbershop, the people that they teach you about in your Black history class, the people that your children impersonate during the Black History Month play, Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, James Baldwin, Afeni Shakur, so many of these Black political icons we all know about, but we only know the sanitized bits ordained to be shared by the system. They were all far left by today's standards.
Important article called about woke imperium, which is how imperialism cloaks itself in justice. Kwame Ture, before he died, or some would say himself assassinated, not famously enough, that Black visibility is not Black power. We always have to remember the condition we find ourselves in is the result of not just a counterintelligence program, but related efforts to destroy all manner of radicalism in all communities. Now, for instance, the counterintelligence program was directed not just at Black people. They had one specifically for Black people, but they had one for the communists. They had one for the labor movement. They had one for the indigenous peoples movement. They had one for the Latinos. They had one. So they were targeting in every way possible to destroy all the various radical movements to create the vacuum that we're still struggling with now.
A movement like Black Lives Matter, that in the leadership of which, is people who invented the hashtag and were doing their best, but who ultimately are starring in Crown Royale commercials and commercials for luxury cars. Meanwhile, the people who were there in the 60s and 70s, people like Angela Davis, did not take on a leadership role in that movement, have been largely silent, haven't been especially out there critical of people like Joe Biden, despite being an abolitionist and Joe Biden being the architect of the crime bill. What does it do to be absorbed into these academic worlds and to have tenure and to be insulated from all of that? Do you really want to go back to the world where your colleagues are being shot down by the FBI in the dead of night in their hotel rooms like Fred Hampton?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to put a target on any given activist.
Right.
But there is a reason that the people who are allowed to have peace and are left alone are allowed peace to be left alone, and why other people are on jail and are still on the FBI most wanted list.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why so many people are so easily co-opted. It's not that they're bad people, but it's a tough world out there. People have bills to pay, don't have health insurance. Activists don't have regular jobs. They have families to support. And so when these offers come down the pike and all they have to do is soft pedal things a little bit, say, look, I'm willing to give you X, Y, and Z concession. And here you get to be in a room with Barack Obama and, you can get a good contract out of this. And, oh, look, I'll give it to your foundation. This is how it happens. And it's not that these people are necessarily weaker than average or bad people, but you got to be made of sterner stuff.
Yeah.
Because the system knows how to corrupt. You've been doing it for almost 100 years at this point.
Yeah. These folks were leftists, not liberals, not Democrats, definitely not Republicans, leftists.
Just because the system is corrupt and the system does corrupt people that does try to enter and change it doesn't mean the answer is leftism or Marxism or any other nonsense you've been preaching this whole hour so far. You can go against the system of corruption without being a leftist. You can just not like corruption. That goes with anything at all, whether it's the military, whether it's corporations, whether it's the health insurance or the pharmaceutical companies. You can always be against that, but also not be a leftist. Those two things doesn't have to be the same person.
Some of you are probably struggling with what I'm saying here because if you're like me, especially if you grew up in the 90s and 80s under that Black excellence element because you were told you had to work twice as hard to get half as much, and because you were trying to grab that brass ring, it sounds like I'm talking crazy. And I guess to an extent I am. I'm probably telling you to reject the reality you've lived under for a long time, but maybe pay attention to your eyes, your heart. Because if you're like me, you heard that socialists were evil and imagine communists or anarchists as long-haired hippies from rich white families putting flowers in guns and then, voting for Ronald Reagan when they grow up and get jobs. You're not alone. I was there too, not that long ago. It's a scary and sobering thing to realize how intentional and effective this propaganda campaign has been. The Black political figures from that era who were left-leaning and anti-capitalists were murdered by the state, imprisoned, or exiled, often dying in other nations for fear of being persecuted by the state. Meanwhile, figures that remained and are often platformed to speak on Black issues became more conservative and capitalistic in their beliefs, often adopting revolutionary rhetoric and aesthetics while actively avoiding true action toward the social change that Black people needed and flaunting their petite bourgeois existence in Black power cosplay, telling us that we really need our LLCs and to work harder and support Black businesses. We'll get to that a little later. While the radicals and revolutionaries died, those folks getting money and power went on to become the boule.
Here's a funny thing, because he tried to make this always some white power type thing, but anytime a government, any place in this world have a group or society, secret society that is a danger of uprooting the current government, they're going to try to do things to prevent that from happening, whether or not that current in place or in power government is corrupt or not. And that's just not a American thing doing it to Black people. It is a human person, human civilization type thing. For example, when communism was booming in Europe in the 1900s, after the First World War, people was getting deported out of non-communist countries in Europe, like France, like Germany, like all these other places, like Britain, such and so forth, because communism wasn't a good thing. It wasn't something they wanted to allow in their country, because they saw how they killed and uprooted the whole country in Russia, leading to starvation and civil war and gulags and untold suffering for those people. And that was before they even got to Stalin. Before Stalin, there was still war and suffering, like the Whites versus the Reds in the Civil War, how they killed the whole Romanov family, who was the previous Tsar of Russia. They saw these violent things that were happening due to civil war and to unrest, and they wanted to prevent that stuff from happening, especially after a almost 10-year-long world war that led to tens of millions of lost money and also over a million deaths of people on both sides. Europe was torn apart. So the last thing you want is a civil war. So my point is, this isn't just a American thing targeting Black people. This is just a government type thing, and it has nothing to do with capitalism or communism, because even when communism was established in Russia, they still exiled people or killed them or put them in prison because they didn't agree with that specific type or direction or method of communism or Marxism. Or some people didn't even want to do Marxism, they wanted anarchism or totalitarianism or bring back the Tsar. Certain stuff like that is let out in the open when you just try to have anarchy and unrest and try to uproot everything because you feel you're oppressed.
Going back to Freaknik the musical, the coolest Easter egg from that cartoon that shows that it's a lot more, subversive than you might think, is that all the members of the Boule have medallions with the number 10 on them. This is a reference to W.E.B. Du Bois's concept of the talented 10. A concept that, again, if you are a child that was aspiring to Black excellence, if you, had one or two college educated parents and ran off to your college or HBCU to try to get the bag. And again, I want to be clear, I'm not telling you not to get the bag. That is not what being a socialist is about, but that's another video. Du Bois theorized in 1903 that what Black people needed was 10% of the Black population to get educated, amass economic and political power, and then use that to lead Black people out of our predicament. But again, the thing that we don't know is that 40 years later, a much older, wiser, and to be honest, probably angrier Du Bois revised his concept into the guiding 100th. He recognized that elitism and the black bourgeoisie class interests would never allow a small amount of black folks with a lot of power and money to actually use those talents and resources and dedicate it fully to black liberation. Du Bois stated in this version that moral and ideological elements needed to trump talent in terms of who actually became black leaders. Otherwise, as Fred Hampton said, you'll mess around and have black imperialists.
My talented 10th must be more than talented and work not simply as individuals. Its passport to leadership would be its willingness to sacrifice and plan for such economic revolution in industry and just distribution of wealth as would make the rise of our people possible.
Du Bois's socialist underpinnings are on full display here, which is likely why this essay from Du Bois isn't well known, because it would conflict with the myth of black excellence that we've been living under for the last 50 or 60 years. That the core of seeking black liberation was somehow black wealth, that economic freedom was going to lead us to literal freedom. And this is the hardest pill to swallow in all of the discussion, because if white capitalism isn't helping white poor people, what the hell makes you think that black capitalism is going to somehow help black poor people? All of this information I've just talked about in this video about the reality of the civil rights movement and the reality of our actual political situation in America, it's out there. It's not a secret. This research took all of a couple of hours total. So why have, for the last 50 plus years, we as a collective been fed this sanitized capitalistic version of these stories? Even in the so-called alternative black radical spaces, we see buffoons and grifters somehow inheriting the black radical legacy and feeding us nonsense as if it's deeply hidden truths, when the truth we really need is not that hard to find.
Yeah, it's more nonsense like uprooting your community, uprooting your country, and causing devastation and civil war by a whole new different type of government that has proven over and over again that it doesn't work. And the current, I don't know, manifestation of that ideology is what you have in China or, you know, Russia. China plays with capitalism because they came to realization, like anybody with, you know, sense, that you can't just have a functioning society and be fully communist. You're just not going to be productive, and it's not good for your benefit. You're going to lag behind. There is benefits to capitalism, and he is literally living and enjoying the benefits of capitalism while down talking it and acting like it is what's holding him back while he makes money off of it.
Brought up the Talented 10th because the Talented 10th, a nebulous group that I technically probably belong to, have collectively done exactly what Du Bois has feared over the last 30, 40 years. We've abandoned the duty to uplift all black people and became complacent with our own success while moderating the needs of the other 90%.
You don't, oh my gosh, here's the thing. People are their own person. You can't force somebody to take on a specific behavior or do a certain thing if they don't want it to be. They will keep making bad decisions or bad choices because that's what makes them feel good, or they deem that's what's best for them. And you can't do nothing for them besides try to talk to them and lead them on the right path. But at the end of the day, they make their own decision. You're an adult, and you have the freedom to make your own choices and make the best of your life. We all, at the end of the day, want the same thing, which is probably a family, to be successful and to be stable. Oftentimes, we want to have as least amount of stress as possible, and that often comes from restricting your bubble or keeping people out that is very chaotic. So I'm not going to bring in random chaotic people because I feel old to them because they share the same skin color to me. I'm not going to have a simple mindset like that.
Often in service of our white benefactors. And this is where we really have to start rethinking the reality of black conservatism and the complex paradoxes that exist in modern black political power and black capitalism. Don't get me wrong, Candace Owens and Thomas Sowell and Jesse Lee Peterson, they're all problems and grifters.
They're problems and grifters, but you said it took you a few hours to come up with this stuff. But at least Thomas Sowell, he is a professor, he's intellectual. His books take long years of research and come out with all the sources referencing it. And what you come out here saying is MLK was socialist and black and they didn't tell you about it, so you should be socialist and Marxist, and that's the way for black community. But Thomas Sowell's a grifter.
And do and say things that hurt black people. But here's the thing.
Hurt black people.
Those niggas are a white people problem. They don't address themselves to black people. They aren't propped up by black people. And outside of black people in the online.
Yes, we love to prop up what athletes, rappers, musicians, and people who made their money through very finite ways and often talk about doing negative stuff for our community and uphold it as some type of righteous thing or black culture. Yes, how bad it is or how great it is that people like Thomas Sowell and other black leaders who have families, are successful, and have clean records aren't poster people for the black community. I know it's so tragic, right?
Left, there's barely any interest or knowledge of these fools to most black people. The only reason I put their asses on the original version of this thumbnail, because y'all know I changed my thumbnails, it might not be there by the time you see this, is because I know they're a favorite subject of white leftists and that they will be more likely to click the video if they think that a like me is going to waste his time talking too much about Candace Owens and Thomas Sowell. But y'all, I didn't even know who the Thomas Sowell was until I started making videos. He is literally that insignificant to actual black political thought. But to white conservatives, he's like the king of black people. And to white leftists, he's the puzzle piece they just can't figure out. To black people, he's just another sellout with a bad haircut. And
Yes, and this Thomas Sowell, who has multiple published books, who has loads of knowledge on economics, politics, societies, and history, is nothing more but a bad haircut coon compared to this guy who is a Marxist and makes money off of YouTube ads through capitalism and companies that he claims he hates. But Thomas Sowell is a grifter. He worked hard to get where he is and to have knowledge about what he's talking about. But this guy did a few hours of research and somehow he's not the grifter. That's cute.
Genuinely do not give a about him. Don't get me wrong. They'll get theirs eventually on the main channel one day. But for black people, the real challenge is not debunking the obvious anti-blackness of these grifters. We have to get into the more subtle and more difficult to unpack figures that we have adopted as our thought leaders in Black America for the better part of the last 50 years. Black figures in politics and entertainment that have basically been our talented 10th. And it's time that we examine exactly how they have sold us short on that bargain. And a lot of people are probably going to be really mad at me when they see who I put up on this Summer Jam screen when I start talking about it. But you're going to have to wait. I wanted to keep this one short enough so that people didn't have an excuse not to watch it. So y'all just going to have to be willing to come back for part 2 whenever that comes out, either next month or the month after that. And then you'll see who the real problematic black conservatives actually are. Until then, peace and blessings, y'all.
Wait. Yes, because I'm sure those Black Republicans who just have families, live their lives, and just stress self-accountability and personal responsibility is what's really tearing apart the Black community. Not the people within our own community who engage in negative actions like gang violence and not having families, having multiple children out of wedlock, and constantly cause negative issues within the same communities they care about. I mean, they claim to say that they care about. Well, I'm glad I finally got this over with. It was, I don't know, it wasn't really that surprising. I just didn't know he was a Marxist until the video started and I saw that book in the back. And this video it seemed like nothing more than, I don't know, MLK and all these other black people, leaders were leftists or socialists or Marxists during a time where Marxism and socialism was blowing up. And I'm supposed to go along with that and agree with that ideology because I'm black. And I shouldn't have a mind of my own. I don't know. It just sounds like more nonsense to me. The same people that say every black person is unique and they can be their own person still wants black people to talk the same, think the same, and act just like them. But a black person having their own state of mind and just thinking for themselves is somehow a grifter, a coon, or whatever. No matter how much more accomplished he is, how much more knowledgeable he is, and how much more wise. He's a grifter compared to a Marxist who makes money off of YouTube ads from capitalist companies. It's your boy Logos, and I'll talk to y'all next time.